Hello and welcome to another Max Chroma tutorial video. In this video, I'm going to be showing just a few things about how to manually extract hue masks within Photoshop by default. Now, this is something you would do if you have an image and you want to extract just a range of a particular hue and how it blends into black and white and gray. Now, there's a couple different basic test images that people use sometimes. This particular one is sometimes referred to as a Granger chart. It really is the hue range, but it's changing where the white and black blend with it based on the luminosity of the hues themselves. So essentially, if we look at a yellow here, cyan, okay, magenta, compared to the blue, if we just were to convert this into a grayscale by default, you can tell, even this isn't really the way that you'd look at the luminosities, but you can tell that even in default mode, it's sort of saying, well, a blue is a darker color to your eyes than yellow, cyan, or magenta. Luminosity itself, I'll show in another video how to manually extract that. It's actually quite simple. You would just duplicate this layer and go really with the layer below it. You kind of don't need that other layer, so you really just kind of have a layer underneath this layer, and then you take the one on top and you set it to luminosity in the blending mode. So that's the true apparent luminosity to our visual system of how a blue hue doesn't really appear as bright as, let's say, a yellow hue. To me, that is kind of a subjective thing in that it still is the brightest blue you could see. It's just apparently darker to our vision than a yellow hue. It's kind of subjective as to whether you think the cyan is darker than the yellow or not. It's really stuff that's a whole other discussion about color science and methods of color measurement, but that's not the scope of this video. So there's a way to look at that gradient of white blending to the hues, either like a Granger chart, or like I tend to do with some of my color tests, is look at it under the HSB or HWB, Hue Saturation Brightness, Hue Whiteness and Blackness color models. And that really isn't taking into account luminosity of the hues. It really looks at each hue as its own pure value. So with whichever way you go about extracting from this, and I could show how to create these tests, very simple really. You could just take a gradient map with a rainbow set to it. Sometimes that's in here by default. Other times it isn't. Really would just be making it from red to yellow, green, cyan, blue, magenta, and back to red. I like to flip it the other way around and hit OK. And then you could create a new gradient map layer. Or I'm sorry, not a gradient map, a gradient layer. So new gradient, and I'll just do a black to white. So this is pure black to pure white. And I have it going vertical, 90 degrees. And then you'd set this to luminosity. Okay, that creates that version. The other version is to take this layer normal, and I'm actually going to merge it, or you could just create these separately. I would duplicate it, take one of them, maybe have it go down here, not to the exact center point, but a little bit below, so you still have some pure hues showing through. This one I'll set to multiply, and then looking at it without the blend mode on, I would have the same thing up here, set to screen. Screen and multiply. And that creates the other type of color test chart. Okay. So I'll just delete those and we'll get back to the chart that we have, the two charts. So in this video, I'm going to use this. Oh, I actually have these built. I'll just rebuild them again. So I'm showing how you can essentially make a color hue extraction mask by default in Photoshop. There's, first of all, the color range tool. And if you use the presets up here, okay, reds, see how that's selecting a mask just around the reds, and it's a very smooth transition into the white and black, into the other hues, but it really just goes to the yellow and stops, to the magenta and stops. So there's the cyan. So that's one method. You create the mask, and now don't pay attention to the selection outline here. I'm going to go to a new layer, and I'm going to fill with white, and then deselect. So we'll do select, deselect, and then I'll do fill with black. Oops, actually want to do fill with black behind. So fill with black, mode behind, like that. And I suppose you could do it another way. Let me just see, select, reselect. If I went to channels and did new channel and then Control-I to invert, kind of the same thing. That's now a channel, however, and to get it as a layer, I would select all, copy, go over, and then make sure I select the RGB channels again, and Control-V to paste. Okay, one of the things I'll get into another video that you need to keep in mind when generating masks is even though you're in RGB mode, your color settings are going to affect. The gray color settings are usually set to default 20% dot gain. If I have that set, it's going to change how this mask appears, and a selection that I make and filling it to a mask channel will be changed by that. So if I go to edit color settings, changing this changes that mask. It's non-destructive, you can change it back, but once you start putting them in layers, there's a little bit of a bug in how they update as layer masks. Again, that's something for a separate video. But to keep in mind, I like to always have my grayscale color setting set to S-gray. Okay, so that's one way to make those masks, but as you saw, it was limited to just the primary hues. And let's say I try to sample that cyan. I'm going to actually change this so I get the exact color to 180 degrees. Select color range. If I have it set to sampled colors right there, cyan, you'll see that that actually does not produce a very smooth selection. It kind of can go and fade into mostly the white, not as much of the black, but it really is sharp when it fades into the other hues. So that's why I don't necessarily use color range in sampled colors mode to get these types of hue masks, but sometimes other color masks come out pretty good with that. Okay. How do you get the other hues then? It's actually quite simple. All you have to do is make a hue or saturation adjustment layer, or you would go to image adjustments, hue and saturation, and process it. And if you just use the hue on master and rotate it, you see I'm just shifting the hues of the underlying image all around. Okay, so let's say I wanted to get the azure blue here. I'm just going to shift it so it is cyan. And I think I have to go negative in this case. So I would go negative 30 degrees. I already know that's how many degrees it would go, from 180 to 210. So I just shift that, and then I can do select color range. And I actually want to make sure that processes. So I'll just go to a new layer and then do select color range. And I still have it on cyans. Hit OK. And I've got that selection. Again, I could go to create a new mask and Control-I, and then Control-A to copy. Oops. Undo that. Control-A, Control-C, copy, and then paste into a new layer that way. Or I could perhaps, I think that honestly the number of steps you do is about the same. So if I had that selection, let's go again. Select color range, cyans, new layer, Shift F5 to fill with white and normal, and then deselect, Shift F5, fill with black, set to behind. Okay, and honestly, once you have the selection, if you're just making a mask, you don't need to do any of that. If I just do select color range, cyans, remember it's selecting the azure blue, so if I turn off that hue adjustment layer, you see now it's selecting the azure blue range really. If I make a new adjustment layer, like a solid color, set to Asia actually in this case. There, I've made a mask automatically. It keeps the selection, generates the mask as I make this adjustment layer. And then I can, change those parts of the image to whatever I want as a color fill layer. You could also have that selection, make a hue saturation layer, and then I'm changing just the hues of that area masked out from the rest of the image, the lightness of it, saturation, and really any adjustment layer. That's just masks and how they work, right? So same thing works on the other Granger chart method of a test image. It just looks a little different when you do that. So let's say I want to get to that azure blue, turn on the hue saturation, and then select color range, cyans. Oops, I don't want to be in that mask when I do it. So new layer, select color range, cyans, just like that. And then maybe make a new solid color fill. Okay, we've got that. Or if I had the selection still there, new layer, Shift F5, fill with, you could do it either way. You could fill, no, I think you kind of got to do it this way. If you want the mask to be white, fading out to black, which is usually how people look at masks as opposed to color separations or extractions, layer extractions. So again, just fill with white, normal, deselect, Control D, Shift F5, I'm doing to fill with black behind. Okay, and then you could set adjustment layers to that or change it with levels, make it more or less smoother or brighter, etc. Now, there's a better way to do this in real time without having to go through that process of using the color range and shifting the hue that way. You'd still shift the hue, but let's go ahead and just delete all these. Look at it one more time on this image. Let's create a hue and saturation HSL adjustment layer, so this way we can rotate the hue around. But now instead of using color range, which is a process, I can create another adjustment layer called Selective Color. With this, in order to do this type of mask, let's say I want the cyans to be the point at which I'm extracting. I'm going to go to the cyans and the colors, have this set to absolute, and then I want to go all the way negative on the black slider, so it becomes white. Then we'll go to the reds, the yellows, greens, really all of the others, and do positive 100 on the black slider here. Not the cyan, just the blue, magenta, and also need to do it to the whites, the grays, and the blacks, neutrals, blacks. And again, I'm just changing the black slider, set to absolute mode. So there it's created that mask selection. And then I can also put a levels adjustment layer. And I can make that darker or brighter. So this is what I call a hue mask. You're really just having it start from the purest hue and fading into the other hues, white and black. Now I can select any of those just by going to this hue saturation adjustment layer and changing that master hue angle. And you can see in real time how I'm just selecting through all of those, right? Okay, one of the drawbacks of this method is you can't actually change how much it blends into the other hues next to it, right? Whether it goes more into blue and less into green, or includes greens and blues. But that is really just a different technique in putting adjustment layers over the original image to extract those hue masks. And so this one works differently. Here I'm going to actually do black and white, set it to maximum black preset, and difference as the blend mode. Okay, and then I'm going to have another hue saturation adjustment layer. So let's not look at those other ones now. So we're a different technique. Black and white, set the difference with maximum black preset. And then a HSL adjustment layer here, which I will go and, let's say, go to the cyans And you see there's a ramp already built around the cyans. And if I force this to white, you're seeing that now blend to white. And to make all the other colors go back to black, we could go through, we really don't want to do it this way by using the same HSL adjuster. So we'll just go and make another black and white adjustment layer and set it to maximum black. So that forces all the other colors to black. And now I just have my range right here. Go to cyans. And you'll see the slider here. It's hard to see with the cyan, actually. Maybe I'll set this back to 0 for the lightness. And we'll pick a different one that will show up more, like let's do yellows. So you see that there's, you can select right here and move it around. Okay, and so there's two parts to the ramp. I'm gonna, again, on the yellows, change this lightness up to there. And so this part of the ramp, it's changing this degrees right here, 55. 60 degrees is really where the pure yellow is. So let's say I set it to 58 or 59. This one, 77. I'll move this slider in to about 62. And then this can go to about 0 or 1 to go to the red. And this one can go to about 119 to go to the green. So that would be the yellow hue mask. But you see I have control over the ramps on each side, right? And, you know, to make it easier, still having the same mask, you could put, again, the master hue adjustment underneath there. So first have a master hue adjustment, and rotating that is changing where the mask selects, right? But with this custom hue mask selection method on the HSL adjustment layer, I think it's just a little easier to be directly in the range you want. So you can see I'm setting that range to white. And so I can go and adjust it to be more solid over to the green. I could have it not go into the greens at all, just go over to the red. I could tighten that in like so. All right, that's pretty much the basis of what I wanted to show in this video, was how to create these type of hue masks manually using some adjustment layers, and what the color range is capable of doing with that, and some of the drawbacks of using color range. Okay, looking at it with just some test images. Let's go to this. Okay, and you know, now that I've actually made those adjustment layers, I can really just copy those over right to here. So on this image, it's doing the same thing, black and white, and then hue saturation, and then black and white again. And we'll take a look at this. And so here's what we'll notice. All right, let's say it was to take this and do the yellow. So go to Select Color Range, try to get the yellows. You see how it's not really a mask of all of this yellow, because this is not pure yellow. Okay, it's kind of a golden yellow, 40 degrees. You see, it was only grabbing stuff in the center because that stuff was pretty much a highlight of 60 degrees. So it wasn't a pure version of the 60, it's pretty white. And that's why with this on, set to just the yellow in a tight range like we had, right? Let's go ahead and look at the hue saturation, go to yellows. You see how I have this range pretty tight. But if I expand this range into the golden yellow, you'll see I'll just select that area, right? And if I move this too far into the red, you see I'm getting too much of the brick background. I could, again, select both of those. But let's say we're just trying to target one area of the image as a mask. So I'm trying to look at the golden yellow color of just this sphere here, right? And on that HSL layer in yellows, I can also then select if it goes into the others. It really doesn't get close to it until you go towards cyan, but yeah, the other one is pretty much an azure blue. Okay, so there's that one. Now let's really just make a new layer. I could go like this and do Control-Alt-Shift-E. So there's that mask. Now I could change this around or duplicate it and not use it. Change this one. Let's go to the yellows. Set that lightness back to 0. And go to cyans. Okay, but again, it's not really cyan. If I go ahead and eyedrop this, we'll see that it's 200 degrees, so it's about an azure blue for most of it. It's halfway. So let's go ahead and turn those back on, not this one, this HSL right here. Go to the cyan, we'll just drag this over until we see all of it. And move these just around that region, and then set the lightness up like so. Okay, so you see how we have basically gotten the extraction of that azure blue sphere, but it's really not as bright as we had the other mask in there for the golden yellow, right? Now that's because it's technically not a pure bright hue. So using Hue Masks starts to break down when the things we're selecting, like this shaded red for the brick, or this azure blue muted azure sphere, are not in the brightest of the hue ranges. That is something where I have another method, the HCWB Custom Color Range, to extract those. And I've been working on an update to that, but let me just show the older version of that. We'll go to it here. I think it's right here, Recent Action, HCWB Color Range. Okay, and let me minimize the updated version, sort of working on some of the techniques for how that approaches the grayscales or not. But if I just go ahead and look at the original image here, click on that area that I want to extract, and then I'll do HCWB Custom Color Range, play the action, and it goes through creating a whole bunch of layers that work to give you a better control over the exact pixel color you want to extract as a mask. And it's not based on just the hue range alone. Okay, so that's generated a mask. Sometimes you'll notice it if I turn on this group here, because it's essentially a color overlay of that mask. And I've got it set right there. I can change that by turning on the color overlay, double click, maybe set it back to that color, and then you can see how I can change it around. Okay, make an adjustment to just that area, right? But let's look at it as just the mask itself by going to maximum range, medium, or minimum. I'll go to minimum range, hit play, and that really just changes the layers around to be visible to make mask adjustments. Okay, and if I want to, I can filter these just by adjustment layers, have properties panel open, and I can make changes to the chroma amount, so how much it's blending into that chroma. Okay, make the mask darker or lighter. And the whiteness, curve, and levels. So sort of going into more of the highlights there. The blackness, curve, and levels. So have it go more into the shades, right? And also a hue angle. And that's really if there was other hues that it was sort of getting into. You can see some of those might have been a little bit noisy pixels of other hues, so we'll just keep it there. And then of course there's master levels. I'll turn off the filter. Essentially, this targets any color pixel. Some of the updates I've been making is that it doesn't really include how it blends to neutral grays, but I'll get into that in the next video where I talk about the HCWB Color Range 1.2 update. It really has to do with whether you want to include how similar that blue color is to a neutral gray. Let me just go ahead and up to a new layer so I'll get the right sample of it. Okay, so it's not a pure hue, it's not a completely neutral color, but sometimes you can have things that are very, very much just a chromatic type of gray. And this mid-tone could be, determined like a chromatic shade type of gray. Anyway, that stuff we'll leave for some future videos. I may just do another example here with, let's say, this. So when you do have things that are pretty much saturated, okay, you can make adjustments. Even on that other one, you could make adjustments to the mask. Let's just delete, actually, it creates a new image. So let's go to that other test file and put those layers in again that we created before. We'll just have to change that again. Go to the yellow, make that 0. We'll do blues, make it white, just move this over to the azure blue. And so you could have a levels adjustment layer on here and go this way. We're sort of getting access to the bright mask like that. But the thing is, let's say you had something in the image that was also the brighter blue and not just the darker blue. And really I can do that by just putting a layer in. We'll just put another color here. Oops. Solid color. So instead of a darker shaded blue, I'll put in a tinted blue. And so the issue is that we would be getting that part as well as the shaded part. Okay. All right. So let's just maybe look at the other example here and grab these adjustment layers. I kind of want to set this back to default first. Go to yellows, 0. And we'll drag these in. Go to the hue saturation. Maybe we'll do red and make it bright white. So you see we're getting from that this one. Let's go ahead and look at them. So this is like 355, just very slightly magenta. This one is almost like an orange. Of course, it's a little bit brighter yellow there. This is like a red, almost a pure red, goes up to about an orange. So what I would do is go to the red and just get it away from those two. Put a little bit more into the magenta. If I go too far, you see I'm kind of cutting into the actual color of it. But there we go. We've extracted that, just that particular glass itself. Okay, and let's just maybe merge, Control-Alt-Shift-E into a new layer. Let's get to the other ones. So you see maybe that mint color. I'll go to the red and really just drag it over there. All right, just like that. And it actually goes a little bit into there. That's pretty good. And again, I could have a levels or curves adjustment layer on top of that if I want to make it a little brighter and get rid of some of the other parts of it, right? Okay, let's go to this again. And it sort of changes. If you move things too much, it kind of changes. See how it changed my reds and called them cyans. Okay, there's that one. And now we'll see, actually, there's a little bit of bleed through. Let's look at the original image. So yeah, this color area right here, see how it's kind of in the orange, 30 degrees. And then this one, even though it's about 8 or 9 degrees here, we go up there and you can see, especially there, it's 34 degrees, about 40 degrees. And again, that's where it kind of breaks down. It's seeing these as pretty much the similar hue range, right? And especially if I have the levels on. But if I just change the ramps of this hue range, it's, I can't really make it not get the top part of this glass and not that part of this glass. But maybe let's see how the HCWB Color Range works on this. So I'll just click the foreground color, eyedrop what I want here, hit OK, and we will do play on this action. And you can run this in 8-bit or 16-bit. It really just depends on the original image. If you have it set to 16-bit, all these actions will run in 16-bit. Okay, let's go ahead and look at this under minimum range. And we can go ahead and now make adjustments to, let's look at just the adjustment layers. And maybe go to hue angle. So we can close that down a little so at least doesn't include the reds. And we can also go to how much whiteness it includes. Make that more or less. And blackness, more or less. Chroma as well. Okay, and then we've got the hue angle. And it's still kind of basically going to see those as very similar. So that's something I've built into, you see there's the manual hue ramp selector. It's already built in which you can turn off the hue angle levels, go to the manual hue ramp, turn that on, turn on the black and white for manual hue ramp, and turn off this custom color layer. Then I can go into this, to the reds, and just move that over to the orange. And we're gonna end up with the same thing happening because it's basically getting all of that and seeing it as a similar hue. I just want to see how close I can get it in comparison. And let's go to the chroma levels. Can only kind of eliminate it, but it still starts to eliminate some of that. And it's still getting just the tip tints of that. And sometimes it's like they really are the same colors. So let's go ahead and look at that. Actually, I can turn that on and use this whole thing. Let's just make a new layer, Control-Alt-Shift-E, and we will do screen and make a new layer from that. And we'll just take a look and see. Okay, that is about 30 degrees. That is about 54, 50 degrees, 60. Yeah, they're very much the same colors. Here, let me do it this way. I'll just eyedrop that area. We'll make a new circle from that. It's like this or similar. We'll bring that over. And we'll see that we've basically got the same thing happening, right? Let's go ahead and do another. Yeah. Yeah, right in those areas, they're pretty close to the same color. So that's what's happening, is we're trying to fade out one region. But really, when you're into this level, honestly, you just manually make a selection and not include that area. Then you can make the adjustments you want. So, if the colors in the image are literally the same, it's going to detect those as the same areas. Let's go ahead and look at what the color range tool does, because there are some things in here. Let's go to sampled colors. We'll get this. Okay, and one of the things people forget about is you can add to your selection. So again, this is where I'm not really trying to show that everything is through some more advanced, easier, better method than what's always in Photoshop. It really depends on how you use it. It could be more complex trying to get to the same solution than just using the default tools if you know how to use them. So let's just sample this area, see what we get if we turn the fuzziness up. We're getting some of that, right? There is something called localized color clusters, okay? And the range, I can turn that down. So now it's really just creating a circular mask around the area I've selected. Increase the fuzziness, bring that range down, and we've selected that mask very easily. Let's go ahead and look at how good that is. Shift F5, fill with white and normal, and then deselect, Shift F5, fill with black behind. So it goes on the same layer, but behind everything. And yeah, look, we've kind of gotten that. It doesn't include this tinted area, right? But let's try that again. Select Color Range. And there's a different thing. Instead of localized clusters, you can have the fuzziness down like so, and then hold Shift. When I hold Shift, I'm adding like this right here with this plus key. So hold Shift, and I can literally just select more and more of it. Okay. Even this tinted region here. And then let's take the fuzziness, see how it's selecting all that other stuff? Let's turn localized clusters on. See if they turn the range down too far, it's cutting into it. Let's keep the range up just a little bit so it doesn't get that part. And then the fuzziness can turn up a bit, turn down, right around there. New, Shift F5, fill with white, normal. And Shift F5, fill with black behind. And there we go. So, personally, I would want to know all of the tools and the way they work, and what are sometimes just easier tools to use that are default in Photoshop. And having other things in the arsenal, it does make it easier in some cases, but not in others. It really comes down to how well you know all of the default tools in the program to begin with, and then when and where to use a tool that enhances and modifies those, works in a different way, right? Okay, let's just try that again. I want to see one of these others. Select Color Range, this one right here. Don't do localized. Can turn the fuzziness way up on this. It really selects a great mask. And again, I can actually just do New Solid Color. And you can see I'm just changing the color of this very easily. Okay, I could do a Hue and Saturation. Just change that around. If I want to look at this mask, double click it. And we're affecting the transparency of it. Let me cancel that and go back out of it again. You can really look at it just this way. Or Alt click on the mask. Now I'm looking at just the mask channel. I could do Control L for levels. Make that more or less, right? Go back to the RGB. I'm on Hue Saturation Lightness, so I can desaturate that, enhance its saturation, change its hue, etc. So, to me, it just comes down to there's a whole bunch of tools within this program by default. Sometimes they break down in the way they work. Sometimes they work in ways that people aren't always aware of. Anyway, I think I'll finish this video. Just wanted to teach a little bit of the methods behind Hue masks and creating them manually. Difference between the luminosities of colors or just the colors themselves, and how to make those Hue masks, how to work with the HSL tool to do that, how the Color Range tool works, and the HCWB custom color range, when it's going to work similarly, or, it honestly doesn't have that localized cluster detection part. So, that's just an overview of all of those techniques. And I'm going to conclude this video. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.